Good afternoon and welcome to SportWorks Talks. My name is Christian Page and welcome to another edition. With me this afternoon is Tina, Head of Communications from FISU.
Well, thank you very much, Christian, and hello everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for tuning in today. I'm really looking forward to this chat.
So what we'll do is we'll now launch into the presentation.
Okay.
And thanks again for all of you for joining us around the world. As always, pop it into the chat where you're from. We'd be great to know where you're joining us from. And as always, the presentation will run for about 20 minutes. And then after the 20 minutes, we'll go into a Q&A. So look forward to having you. All good. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. And let's get started. As the title says, we're going to talk about a little bit of creativity that came about as a result of the situation thrust upon us by this COVID-19 pandemic. We're all together in it, all of us, no matter which industry you're from, like I said, and we had to find ways to innovate, to experiment sometimes, to push the boundaries a little bit, and really see what we could do in the absence of live events. And that probably affected the sports industry more than any other. And I'm sure many of you tuning in today are my colleagues from this industry. You've all probably found your own paths and navigated this situation in your own way. And there's a lot we can all learn from each other. But I'll share with you today what we did and what we learned. And before I start with that, perhaps I would also just briefly introduce FISU, the International University Sports Federation, to you. Because maybe not everyone is completely familiar with what FISU is. So we are the governing body of university sports around the world. And as you will see on this chart here, the organization is about 70 years old now, celebrated our 70th anniversary last year. And some of our main events are really, you will see them on this chart, but our sports events, our flagship sports events are these. It's the Summer World University Games, which until last year you may have heard of as the Universiade. It was the Summer Universiade and the Winter Universiade, which are really our flagship sports events. Thousands of athletes, they take place every couple of years, and that's what drives our main sporting program. But we also have the World University Championships and the University World Cups. And why I'm telling you this is because of what I'm coming to next. So the World University Championships are really interesting single sport or small cluster events, which happen every 2 years in the even-numbered years, hence 2020. And there are situations where we've had up to 30 to 35 of these individual independent events in the year. You see some of the numbers there. They're really geographically, the spread is great. It's a great way for us to be promoting university sport. But this is what the calendar for this year looked like for us. And this is what I was starting with when I started talking to Christian. We had 30 championships lined up for the year, as you will see in this calendar from March till about November end. This was our calendar. It was completely planned. It was completely packed. As the media and communication team, naturally, our entire content plan was built around this. There was going to be live action every single week from March to November. And we had plans to have, news reports, photographs, videos, highlights for most of these events. And also we were looking at really kind of scaling up our live stream and production for at least 6 to 8 of these events to try and match what we do for the University World Cups and even perhaps for the World University Games. However, despite all these grand plans, this is what we were faced with. This is just a glimpse of our news report, one that we were really unhappy to publish, but basically all World University Championships were canceled for 2020. We have an online version of the Mind Sports Championship coming up later this month, but as you can imagine, it's quite a far cry from what an on-site physical event is like. So coming back to the situation where we didn't really know what we're going to do, all of a sudden in March, we sat around together. It's a small team, and we thought, okay, what can we do so that we don't lose the momentum that we had really built up going into March, really talking about our championship season, but also the interest of our audiences. So it's not just about the messages that we are putting out, but it's also about people expecting something from us. We don't want our social media channels to go quiet, but we also don't want them to go boring. So what do we do? So initially, we started with a few ideas. This is a brief overview of some of the things that we did, and I'm going to talk about each one of them separately right now. But we, in fact, launched 13 multimedia campaigns through the 6 months, roughly between March and August. And we found varying degrees of success with each one of them. Some were so successful that we were surprised ourselves. And some repeated formulas didn't actually work so well, which was quite interesting. And I'll talk about it. But these are some of the things that we started, and we'll start with the first one. So right at the beginning, what shall we do? It was March. It was sort of late March. We didn't have an event, but what we did have coming up was the launch of a very important FISU project, which was the FISU Healthy Campus project. That launch was to happen in the middle of May. And one of our plans was to really communicate the values of FISU, which includes sport for all, activity for all, well-being, all-round well-being. And these are the values that the FISU Healthy Campus project is really built on. So one thing we decided to do is that, okay, between March and May, let's start at least by talking about who we are in terms of our values, what is important to us, and try to do it in not such a boring way, you know. So as you can imagine, most of our audiences, and especially on our social media channels, they're young people, they're university students or recent university graduates, sometimes even younger people who are kind of, you know, coming into that demographic. So we want to talk about our values, and we want to talk about fitness, and we want to talk about this challenge of keeping yourself fit at home when most of the world has gone into lockdown. So that's where our first creative campaign really came from. It came from telling people why you should keep up your physical activity, even though you're pretty much restricted to your home, why it's good for you, and present it to them in an interesting way. So just one of the social media tiles that you see here, it's about life hacks for better grades. It's based on actual research. It's based on, you know, going back and reading up about why physical activity is good for you, what are the benefits of sport and physical activity. So going back into that really kind of theoretical academic research, but pulling out things that are relevant for people, something that could resonate with people, and something that people could be interested in. So talking to largely our university student audience, we said, okay, let's give them little nuggets of information that are interesting to them. You want better grades? Well, get fit, you know, start working out. There were others. It was, you know, even things like the amount of calories you burn in different activities and what you can do even at home to burn those calories and things like that. So we called out a lot of this interesting research and tried to present it with creative images. So it's, you know, just the basics which all of you from the comms and media world know about, is just, you know, creating these creative assets, these graphic assets, which give a branding, a look, but also a real punch to the messages that you're trying to send out. So we started with that. It was very, very simple. But what it did do is that it led us to building up that Fit at Home campaign and thinking about how we can take that further. So again, this idea of having your athletes come up with their training regimes, holding these virtual classes, holding virtual training sessions, is not something only we did. Many other federations did that too. But that's really such a great resource. And we realized then that, you know, if we're promoting this Fit at Home campaign, let's actually give people some opportunities to do this fitness at home. And the best people to do that are our student athletes. So we went and spoke to some of our student athletes, and this is really one of the biggest learnings that we had. Talking directly to our student athletes, and I don't even mean in a generic way of, you know, speaking to all of them. I mean, targeting Tim from Germany, for example, or Ernest from Philippines, for example, getting in touch with them and saying, okay, this is our program, this is our campaign. We think you'd be great to be like an ambassador for this program. Why don't you come on board and do some fitness classes for us? You know, tell everybody what your regime at home is like, and in fact, do some takeovers. So this led to us starting to really engage with some of our student athletes. And we did a series of student athletes takeovers on our Instagram. And the content and videos and just, learnings from which we, of course, then shared on other platforms as well. But it was predominantly Instagram that we were using because we saw that the engagement, the reactions were kind of coming more on Instagram than anything else. I'd just like to show you a quick example of one of the takeovers from our student athletes. This is Ernest Obiena from the Philippines. He's a pole vaulter.
So what's up guys, good morning, and this is Ernest John Obiena here. I'm going to be taking over this FISU account for today. I'm going to show you what's my daily activity for a rest day on a Sunday here in Formia, Italy. Hey FISU fans, totally forgot to introduce myself. I'm Ernest John Obiena, competed in the 2019 Summer Universiade. I'm a pole vaulter from the Philippines and my major is BS Electronics Engineering.
Like Ask Me a Question, we found that those were working extremely well. Because people were really asking questions. People were really interested in either getting some information or participating in some way in what was going on. And it was great to see. So that led to the next steps. So having seen that, obviously targeting our student athletes and highlighting them and getting them to come on, create content was working. It was really working for us. And we also saw that some kind of call to action, like Ask Me a Question, was also working. So we wanted to do next, what we wanted to do was A, use our student athletes, and then B, really create a situation where we are asking our audiences to participate. And what we did was actually one of my favorite projects of the entire 6 months. It was what we call the University World Cup Football 2.0 Team Challenge. And I'll explain to you why we called it that before telling you a little bit more about it. It's because we had the first ever University World Cup Football physical event in November 2019. It was held in Xinjiang in China. Great event, path-breaking event in the sense that it was university versus university. So the best university teams from around the world competing in a football tournament. For the title of University World Champion, which is just such a cool concept in itself. It was a great success. We got great international press and media interest in that. So what we did was we decided to hold a virtual tournament, do like a rehash or a replay, if you like, of the University World Cup football. But of course, we can't have football matches. What we decided to do was hang on or let's say jump onto the bandwagon of these juggling videos, which were already becoming very popular. So I'm talking about sort of late May, early June here, when you would have seen it was happening in a lot of sports. It was happening in gymnastics. I remember some great videos in cheerleading, where the idea is that all these independent people within their homes are creating clips which are then stitched together with their team or with their friends to make it look like some kind of seamless sequence. So, basically these juggling videos in football where one guy passes the ball and someone else receives it. We decided to contact the teams that participated in our event in Xinjiang and ask them to create one of these juggling videos each. And they did. The great thing was that they were just itching to have something interesting to do as well. And most of them wrote back to us saying, you know what, you gave us a reason to be back in touch with our teams. Everyone was really like locked down in their homes at the time. And they loved it. And you can see the sheer joy in some of these videos. We highlighted the sport. We showed it was fun. We did some cool video edits. And I would like to show you one of these videos. Yeah, well, I absolutely love that. The whole event, the whole virtual tournament was so much fun. And as you will see here on the slide, we had 10,000 people voting. This is Instagram story voting, right? So it's that little box that you have in Instagram stories where you can vote. That's how we decided the champions or the winners of the quarterfinals and the semifinals. And just in the final alone, so I'm not talking about the whole tournament, just when this IULM from Italy went up against Mexico State University in the final, with 10,000 votes in the final. And that honestly, that surprised even us because we weren't expecting it. But it was great. So we learned something from that. So then going ahead, one of the other things that we decided to do was go back into our archives because we had some amazing events. And I was talking about the World University Games earlier, the Universiad, which have seen some spectacular opening ceremonies, some really, really world-class performances, you know, some record-setting performances. So what we did was then go back and choose about around 30 of these, what we decided to rename as the Unisports Classics. And then we streamed these once a week on average. And we really saw that there was a lot of interest in this too. Facebook was definitely one of our more successful platforms for this, although we did stream it on FISU.tv, our OTT platform, as well. But just as an example, on average, around 50,000 views just on Facebook, which for us, these are good numbers. We're happy with these numbers, especially when we're talking about basically rehashing old footage and, you know, representing archives. For us, that it did very, very well. So we were really happy with that as well. So next was something truly experimental. And I mean, I have to say at this stage, you know, when we decided to go the eSports way, this obviously wasn't a decision of just the media and communication team. This was a decision that was taken at the leadership level, at the management level of the federation. Esports was not part of the FISU sports program, so it required a little bit of, you know, change. But when the decision was taken, it was very, very exciting indeed, because it's this huge section of audience that we hadn't been tapping into at all until then. You know, it's just such a distinct group that's actually into gaming and esport. And in partnership with FIFA, we decided to do the FISU Esports Challenge Football. It was super successful. We had participants from all around the world. It was conducted like a University World Cup. So, you know, it was our national federations that actually entered the participants. And the whole tournament was, of course, held online. So while the management of the tournament itself was something that our sports departments did, and I have to say they were absolutely thrilled to have a sport event to run, the promotion of it and the streaming and, you know, the whole perception created around it was something that we worked on. And it was enlightening for us because we had to start looking into new platforms like Twitch, which we really hadn't looked into before, and were quite astounded by the very direct and the very obvious engagement that we got on that platform, specifically from gamers, from people following esport more than, you know, any other thing. We tried Twitch again later, didn't work so well. So I'm going to come to that in a little bit. So esports was great. It was really something experimental and worked out very well for us. And then we went back to some of the things that worked well for us. So as I mentioned, the football team challenge, it was great because it was kind of like a blend of some of the things we had learned by then, that user-generated content is great, but especially when you highlight your student athletes, you target people, you create a virtual tournament. So we tried to do that once again with 3x3 basketball, because we also have a University World Cup in 3x3 basketball. However, it did not work quite as well as the football event did. And when I start talking about some of the lessons learned, I'll tell you why. But after this, the next step was to really open it up and not just get content from our athletes, but try this whole user-generated content, go into that field and try and open our challenges to everybody and get people to participate in our challenges. And one way that we decided to do this was during the International Day of University Sport, which is an important day for us. It's 20th of September every year. And normally around the world, we have our member federations staging these huge sporting events. Now, of course, this year, most of them were not able to have physical events. So what we did was launch this EDUS meaning International Day of University Sport, EDUS Dance Challenge, where we had two of our cheerleading athletes create a prototype routine. And then it was open to all, open to everyone on predominantly Instagram, but also our other social media channels. And we got people to say, okay, come on, try to replicate this routine. And I think what we have for you next is probably the winner or maybe the finalist of the channel challenge. Let's show you that.
Ain't nobody stopping me. If you're ready, let's go right now. Exports, we touch the ground. Brazilian extreme, represent my team. We gotta take your dream, take your hometown and sing it. Exports.
So as we start winding up, let's tell you what worked and what didn't. Those were just some of the 13 campaigns that I talked about. One thing that really worked was, every time we were really like trying to be creative and doing something new and pushing the boundary and like just being experimental, that actually worked. It worked really well. Communicating values worked very well for us with the whole Fit at Home campaign that I talked about earlier. Okay, you don't have events going on, but as an organization, you stand for something, you have a brand, you have an identity, and you have values. And as long as you present the values in the right way, in an interesting way, there's no reason for this kind of messaging to not work. So that was really a great learning for us. Because sometimes, as media teams, you're always looking for the hook, the really interesting content, which is almost always the sports action. But it was great for us to realize that, communicating values can really work and have results. As explained earlier, highlighting our athletes was a really big plus. Go straight to your athletes, talk to your athletes, identify them by name, by sport, get in touch, call them up and say, listen, we want you to come on board and do this with us. It really, really worked for us. And then virtual tournaments, the football team challenge, the eSports tournament, they worked really, really well. And towards the end, also the EDUS Dance Challenge, which I'll explain in a little bit more when we talk about learnings and challenges. Sport, just highlighting the sport again, whether it's through archives, the best footage from the past, whether it's about creating these virtual tournaments or doing these juggling compilation videos, just getting your athletes to show their sport, always going to work. And moving ahead to what maybe didn't work so well. No, before that, what worked, what I want to show you here is really the fact that, engagement was so important during this time. And the plus that you see is followers. So not great change in the number of followers, just showing you Facebook and Instagram here as examples. Some thousands more on Instagram, some thousands more on Facebook. And please do remember, this is really just about 180 days between March and August. But what was great for us was this huge jump in engagement, which went from an average of 2.07 through all of 2019, when we had 2 editions of the World University Games. So, that's where we really see our peaks. That year was 2.07 on average, and this 6-month period was 4.46 in terms of engagement on Instagram. So clearly, when you look at engagement, we did something right. All right, now moving ahead to where the challenges were and what we found difficult. Firstly, the participation numbers, when we tried to do these open user-generated challenges, whether it was the 3x3 trick shot challenge, which we opened to everyone. It was not limited to our athletes or to people who've been at FISU events before. It was difficult to get the kind of numbers that we'd hoped for. We find that audiences find it more easy to just quickly press a button and vote for something or ask a question and be engaged. But if you ask them to go and create a trick shot or create a dance challenge, maybe they're not so keen. And perhaps we also should have looked at trying to do these on Instagram Reels, for example, where it's, it does seem to be working for a lot of people. So that was one learning for us, that maybe user-generated content campaigns have to be very targeted and have to be on very specific platforms for them to work, whether it's TikTok or Reels and things like that. And we didn't really kind of explore that. The other thing was repetition. So I mentioned that we saw this great success with the football team challenge virtual tournament, and then we tried to do it again with the 3x3 trick shot challenge, but it didn't work. Maybe because it was a very similar kind of format. And when I say it didn't work, yes, we got results, we got engagement, but not at the same level. And we think that has something to do with audience fatigue, because also by sort of the last couple of months of this lockdown, a lot of federations, a lot of sport organizers were doing similar things. You know, everybody was doing these juggling videos and virtual tournaments and things like that. So there was a certain amount of audience fatigue, which then goes back to the point of keep being creative, do something new, because otherwise people are just completely bored. And platform suitability, as I said, if you're going to do open user-generated content campaigns, do them on Reels, do them on TikTok. It's probably more suitable. And similarly, eSport worked so well on Twitch. It was really, really popular on Twitch, but we tried it for some of the other things that we did a bit later, and it didn't work quite as well. So keeping in mind that you have to really curate your content according to the platform is something that we're going to keep with us as we go ahead. So just as I wrap up, what next? Just one of the ideas that we have. What we're going to do, hopefully, in November is go back to some of our iconic performances, at the World University Games, maybe just from last year, at Napoli, at Krasnoyarsk, and get those athletes to come and sit with us and talk us through that amazing gold medal winning performance and tell us what it felt like at that moment. So that's something we're looking forward to doing in November, and hopefully have a lot of fun with that. And with that, that's it for the presentation, but happy to take your questions.
What a great presentation.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think you'll agree with me online, those of you who joined us. What an incredible amount of information, and really grateful for the willingness to share what your learnings were, because I think we were all challenged by what we're facing with the current crisis, and it's wonderful. And as I said at the very beginning, great to learn from people who are turning the adversity, the challenge into something new, and just looking at the learnings, what worked, and also what didn't work. One of my first questions is, so you took these great learnings from what you did online during these last months. How do you see that evolving into future editions? Because obviously you said, your increased growth, you went up to nearly 5%.
Yeah.
Some great information there to go, okay, what are we going to do now when we go back to the university? Summer university.
Yeah, absolutely.
World Games.
The World University Games. No, it's okay. It's still relatively recent, the change in name, so it's okay. I think this is the thing. We learned that, so some of the main learnings, as I said, was that you need to engage your athletes directly, and we're going to do that. So going forward, we are definitely going to be looking at having sort of ambassadors from among our pool of athletes, preferably from those who are actually going to be participating in the event. But that's not always going to be possible because they have to be focused on their competition. But maybe then looking at some who've been at just the previous edition of that event and having them really create some social media content for us, more behind the scenes, more what's going on, how are they preparing. So getting our student athletes to create this really specific content for us, that's something we're going to do for sure. And I think it's going to work really nicely hand in hand with the physical on-site event. And the other thing is, for that engagement, that number to get close to 5 again, giving people something to do, that call to action, which works so well for us on Instagram. We'll have to see whether or not there's ways to also create that on other platforms, with polls on Facebook and things like that. But what we found was on Instagram, it works so well. And we're going to try and do more of these, like, vote for the best, or mini contests within the competition, or ask questions. Today's your takeover with our participant from the biathlon that's coming up in 2 days' time. Ask them any question you want. That kind of thing should work.
I like the idea, and I think something you made a big point about here, direct engagement with the athletes. And gosh, we work in this industry for the athletes. it's all about the sport, and it's all about the athletes. So it's wonderful to hear that what worked was this engagement with the athletes, and as you're saying, bringing them back into the picture and creating that. As you say, it is direct engagement with the athletes, so you can have that conversation. I think that's wonderful for fans to have that. And it's difficult in many sporting scenarios, so I think it's a really a great opportunity.
Yeah, it really is. And it's really about conversations, as you say, Christian, because even before, we have highlighted our athletes, obviously, but with their performance. Yeah. So with the live clipping that we do from our live events, it's always about the gold medal performance or the top three, etc. But it's about getting to know them as people, which is what is so interesting, because you don't always get to see that.
No, not at all. Yeah. I think for those of us that work in sport and the sport working community, one of the challenges is obviously we're delivering the stage for the athletes, and I think this is again another opportunity for us to get involved and learn more about our clients, the people we're looking to serve and support. So it's wonderful. So we've got a question here. We've got from Daria. Thank you for your question. Thank you for the great presentation.
Well, thank you.
Which of these activities do you expect to stay in post-COVID times? Good question.
Yeah, so I think just taking off from what we were just discussing right now, because it's a very similar question. I definitely think the top of our agenda is to have this very directed conversation with some of our select athletes. And, let me make it clear here. So there's one thing that you can do is to kind of do this call to action to all your athletes and, say, hey, guys, why don't you send us some video of you doing this. But what we found was this generic call to action doesn't always work. It takes a little bit of extra effort, but what you need to do is sit down with that list of the participants of some event and literally say, okay, I'm going to contact this guy and this girl and this guy and this girl, and then contact them, write to them, call them up. It's a little harder, but gosh, the results are so much better because you are really talking to people. They get interested in your projects. And I think, as I was saying, it's something we look to do and really make them sort of, our social media ambassadors and get them to create our content for us.
Fantastic. And as you say, getting in contact, it is about just calling. It is
sometimes.
How did you find the athletes responded when you did call them? Like it was a great response.
It was great. That's the thing. If you kind of do this call on your Instagram or your Facebook, there might be some kind of lukewarm response. Maybe 2 people will write back to you. But when you call a guy directly and say, your team was at our World Cup last year, can you do a juggling compilation video for us? They are so happy to receive that call from you, and they're like, sure, of course we're going to do it. And then they make sure they deliver. So great response to that.
Great. One thing you mentioned here, one of the other strategies you adopted was regarding the archive.
Yes.
Going back into your archives, and it's often a discussion that we've had with different federations and different organizations about, well, how do we repurpose our archive? Obviously, you had some good engagement with that as well.
Yes. Yeah. Especially on Facebook.
Okay.
We, like I said, we did stream them on FISU.tv as well. But I think in general, our audience pool on Facebook, just our numbers are greater than on our OTT platform at the moment. So that's probably why we saw greater response and viewership on Facebook. And I think it was really just about not just churning out anything. Yeah. It was about going back into, I won't say 70 years of archives, but from about 2009 onwards, we have real good production quality footage of our World University Games. So it was actually about going back and having a look at really the best. What is the compelling, what is that most amazing opening ceremony that we had, or what is the greatest pole vault duel that we had in the final, and picking those moments and streaming those. I think that's what worked, to just, do that little bit of extra work and make sure you're picking out the very, very compelling content.
Fantastic. So looking ahead, I know just one more question, or we're probably close to time.
Yeah.
Looking ahead, you've got the next challenge, so where you're bringing your athletes. And so when is this due to launch? This is around November time, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll also explain to you why we're thinking of doing this. So normally in January 2021, we should have been hosting the FISU World University Games in Lausanne, the winter edition, which was scheduled for Jan 21. And our entire, again, comms campaign and content plan for November, December, January was the run-up to Lausanne 2021. So what we've decided to do is actually go back to some of the stellar performances from Krasnoyarsk 2019, which was the last edition of the Winter Universiade, and get them to talk us through some of their amazing performances. And it's going to be, therefore, it's going to be November, December, largely in the run-up to what would have been the Lucerne time. And we're really excited about this because, you know, there are some amazing stories there. For example, there was a Japanese athlete who completely upset this whole squad of Russians that were totally the favorites to win, and you know how he did it. So we want him to be talking about it. And similarly, there's a lot of beautiful stories from Krasnoyarsk, and we want to select those 5 or 6 athletes that were really spectacular in some way, and get them to come and sit with us and talk about what they did. They'll be looking at the footage and looking at their own expressions and, you know, telling us what it was like. The challenge with that is obviously going to be the translation.
Yes.
So, you know, we're trying to get around that. We obviously realize that we may not be able to do these live for that reason, and then have to bring that to you with some transcriptions. But we're still working around the modalities, but it's something we're quite excited about.
Fantastic. I can't wait to see it. So that's coming out in November, December. That'll be through FISU.tv, or will you just go to the FISU?
Yes, we hope to be putting it on all our digital channels and social media. So yes, it should be on all our platforms.
Wonderful. Okay, so there's just time for one more question. So here's a question from Preeti. Thank you for your question. Given the recent popularity of TikTok with Gen Z and millennials, any plans on FISU being on TikTok?
Yes. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is that we actually did plan to launch TikTok in a full-fledged way in autumn this year. But honestly, we haven't done it right now because we were grappling with the challenges that the COVID-19 situation threw at us. And we decided, it was a decision that we made around June this year as a team, that, you know, that's one less challenge we're going to take on ourselves right now. So it can wait a bit. We wanted to negotiate the really, you know, the tough period of the pandemic first. So yes, it's very much on the cards. We just haven't done it yet.
Okay, there we go. So thanks for that question, Preeti. That's great. So another question here from Daria. Sorry, one more. We've got just one time for one more question.
Okay.
Thanks for the response. Another question, if I may. As a participant of FVLA 2020, I found that the online version was far more accessible to more participants globally.
Yeah.
Do you think keeping part of the Academy virtual in future would be a good idea?
I think it's a great idea. And the good news is that you can go on the FISU website right now and check out the news that was posted half an hour ago, which tells you exactly this, which tells you that next year's FISU Volunteer Leaders Academy is going to be a hybrid program. It's going to be partly online and partly on site, so that there's a greater opportunity for more people around the world to participate. So bang on. Full marks to you, but we're doing that. Yeah.
Perfect question, Daya. Perfect timing. I'm glad we finished on that one. And I'm glad we had a direct answer. My gosh, how often does that happen? So that's wonderful. Look, I just want to say to all of your participants, thank you so much for joining us online. We know it's there's a lot going on, and we know everybody has busy time. So we hope, and I really believe this presentation was incredibly valuable. Lots of insights. Really grateful for you, Tina, for coming into the studio and sharing your insights, what did and what didn't work. And I think that's really valuable. And I think it's only going to help further the community across the world. So great for having you with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk. And from my colleagues in the sports world, I'd love to hear from all of you as well. You know, what you did, what you learned, what worked, what didn't. The more we share, the more we learn.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I wish you all a safe afternoon wherever you are around the world, and all the very best. Bye for now.